56-year-old Jerome Murdo was a mentally ill, homeless veteran who was arrested for sleeping in a closed stairwell in a housing project on a cold night in Harlem, New York. He was taken to Rikers Island, where he died of apparent heat stroke and massive dehydration a week later in his cell. At least 4 officials who reported to reporters anonymously because they weren't allowed to disclose the details of the case, said that the cell's temperature rose to over 100 degrees when they finally discovered Murdo in his cell. And the heat was as a result of malfunctioning heating equipment within the jail cell, which had been neglected to be fixed or dealt with. One official stated that, quote, he basically baked to death. Murdo was also taking anti-seizure and antipsychotic medication, which, according to medical experts, can inhibit the sweat glands and make a patient more vulnerable to heat and raised temperatures. Murdo was being held at the mental health wing under suicide watch, so he was supposedly supposed to be checked every 15 minutes, but instead his body was not discovered until at least 4 hours after he died. Murdo had been arrested before for similarly petty charges of trespassing, drug possession, or public intoxication related to his homelessness as well as his mental health problems. But rather than trying at any point to get this man help, he was arrested, and his bail was set for $2,500, which of course he in no way had any means of posting, and then he was allowed to roast in a 10-by-6 jail cell in his special observation unit. Jails and prisons are now becoming the functioning asylums and mental health clinics in this country. And this is just another example of the many failings of our mental health and our justice system and the way that we treat the mentally ill and the homeless in this country. And this man was a veteran. He was an ex-Marine. And this is very similar to the 75-year-old man who was found in his jail cell in a pool of his own blood and waste just a few weeks ago. And before that was a 60-year-old mentally ill man who died in a jail cell after a petty shoplifting charge. And I did a story not long ago here on TYT Community about the 22-year-old who died in a jail cell after a food allergy. And his reaction to the food allergy was completely neglected until he died after he was arrested for a minor misdemeanor drug offense. So, and Murdo's mother was not even aware of Murdo's death until almost a month later when she got a call from Associated Press regarding the story. So, of course, their family is devastated, and his sister has said that we want justice. He wasn't just some homeless man on the street. He was loved. He had a family. He had feelings. So, open it up for discussion. What do you guys think? How does this story make you feel?
This is a story that keeps getting repeated over and over again. You've got a mentally ill patient, nowhere to go. Mental health facilities are closed, just like we, covered in the last segment. And even if there are, you really can't force someone to go into those mental health facilities. And of course, this time it's a veteran that comes home, and he's got a substance abuse problem that got worse after coming home from being, in the military, and he becomes homeless because of that substance abuse problem and mental illness together, and then he ends up in prison. Now, according to the AP, get this, 40% of the 12,000 prisoners at Rikers are mentally ill as well. So he was almost in the majority. That's almost half. And a third of those people have serious problems. And the guards are not trained to deal with those problems. And so, just like we said, we have made prisons the new mental health facilities. Except that they don't deal with the mental illness. It's more of a lock them up and throw away the key mentality.
Right, it's a way of dealing with it's a way of sweeping the situation under the rug without actually having to deal with it.
Right, and to me, this story is that the numbers that Jeff gave bridge the last story in this one, that if you don't take care of people who are mentally ill, they're going to end up in the prison system. And in this case, Rikers is technically a jail, but 40% of the people in the jail are mentally ill. Like, you're doing something wrong. You're putting people who need help in a situation with people who don't know how to deal with them. But the mentally ill aspect of this story isn't really relevant. They left him in a room. They basically left him in a hot box and didn't check up on him when he was on suicide watch. So they were literally supposed to check on him at least every 15 minutes. I think that's New York's policy. And
Right.
they just left him there, and they didn't give him any water or anything like that. And this is like the basics of being in prison. It's like, yeah, you're incarcerating these people. You take away their liberty because they did something wrong, or in this case, they're facing charges for doing something wrong. But you have to take care of them. You can't just leave people to die in your cell. And the malfunctioning heater and all of that, like why would you put them in a cell with a malfunctioning heater? Like, what's wrong with the people there? It's crazy. Like, this is so basic. This is like chapter 1, corrections and sentencing. When they go to prison, don't kill them or don't let them die. Like, it's ridiculous.
Right. They're still human beings. They're still living creatures. They still deserve decent. They still deserve respect for being living beings. It's a level of disconnect, I think, in order to be even one of those prison guards, because they left him there for 4 hours. That's outrageous. To leave anyone alone even if he wasn't on suicide watch, to leave anyone alone in a jail cell that's being overheated because of malfunctioning equipment that they know is malfunctioning. They had to know that it was way too hot in there. It's obvious neglect on their part, and I just wanted to point out that Murdo was black. And I don't want to assume anything, but based on the past, it's pretty safe to kind of guess that it probably had something to do with the fact that he was arrested and the fact that of his treatment in prison. It doesn't help. It doesn't help the fact that he was black on top of everything else, because we know how black people are treated in this country when it comes to the justice system and the prison system and the rate of arrests in this country concerning black people when compared to white people. So I just wanted to add that in. Yes, Murdo was black, so take that as you will and gather from it what you will.
But to me, it's not just that. It's also that he was mentally ill, so he's probably an annoying prisoner. So he was
right.
annoying,
It's definitely
so
not just one thing. It's definitely the mental illness and being mentally ill and being black and being poor and homeless. It's just one thing on top of another on top of another. The poor man.
And I just want to add also the fact that a lot of people generally don't care about prisoners themselves. I mean, right. They did that experiment where students were divided into prisoners and prison guards, right? And it showed that the prison guards, eventually, even though they weren't really prison guards and the other people weren't really prisoners, it showed that people that have that authority, they started actually abusing the prisoners and neglecting the so-called prisoners. They had to stop that experiment.
Right.
I mean, there's something massively, massively wrong with that sort of system of justice system that we have. And this is a good example of another good example of why we need some massive, massive reform. We don't care about prisoners because essentially they're powerless, and the general public doesn't really care all that much about prisoners because we have this assumption that, well, obviously they're bad people, they did something wrong, that's why they're in prison.
Right.
But the reason I brought up the fact that he was an annoying prisoner is because we've seen police, like, the most horrible thing to do to a police officer is to piss them off, right? And that's when they treat you poorly. And it works everywhere down the line through the criminal justice system. Like, this guy was probably loud and annoying, and they didn't want to deal with him. But like, that's your job. You're supposed to be a professional. You can't leave somebody in an overheating cell. That's ridiculous.
And once again, you know, he had mental illness. He needed help,
Right.
not prison.
Right. He needs a mental health facility, but those are becoming even more and more scarce through this country, even as we speak. Our last story about Minnesota closing 5 facilities, you know, in their state. It's just becoming an epidemic. The only place that these people have to go is either jail or the emergency room, and they can't stay in the emergency room very long before they kick you out, so jail.
And I just want to say my final point. The final horrible irony to this whole story is that he was trespassing in order to find a warm place to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And then he died, ironically, from being too hot, overheating, baking to death. And that is just the most cruel irony that this story that I have seen in a long time.
It's true. You're right. Bitter, bitter irony.
We got to change the system.
Absolutely. And we have to fight for these people because they have no voice to fight for themselves.
That's right.